of talk about adoption. And in partnership with National Council for Adoption, we decided to do this panel to talk about adoption perspectives. And so I appreciate you guys being here. We have a couple of awesome panelists. We've got Jade Amez. She is an adoptee. Jade, you want to raise your hand? Yep. We've got Deb Shug. Is that how you say your last name, Deb? All right. She is an adoptive mom. We've got Shantell. She is an adoptee and birth mom. We've got Tony. He's a transracial adoptee. Linnea, where are you? Raise your hand. She is a birth mom. We've got Brian. He is an adoptive father. And then we've got me. I'm a birth mom. Since we are limited on time, I'll just jump right into the questions. Okay, so first question, y'all. What does National Adoption Awareness Month mean to y'all?
I can start. Mm-hmm. I mean, National Adoption Awareness Month, to me, really is a special time because it means there's a lot more spotlight on what adoption is, what it isn't, and what this community looks like. And I'm really fortunate to say that over the last couple of years, we've really expanded who gets honored during Adoption Month, right? Like, when you read out everyone who's on this call, it's about your adoptive fathers, it's about your birth fathers, your birth mothers, the transracial adoptees, anybody, right? Adoption touches so many people in so many different ways of life. And it's really nice that for 1 month, we get to come together and really have a conversation that unfortunately does not get had the other 11 months of the year.
I can so agree with that. And I love how you mention everybody. It's the adoptive parents, it's the adoptees, and it's the birth parents coming together to talk about the topic of adoption on this month,
And I think that that's part of how the month has evolved. I think when it started, there was a lot of yay adoption and let's hear from those adoptive parents and wow, adoptive parents and hey, adoptive parents and yo, adoptive parents. And I think there's been an evolution as we go and kind of like, let's raise up the voices of the adoptees. Let's look at how adoption impacts everybody in the adoption constellation, right? And I think it's also an opportunity to look at how is adoption being done well and what do we need to really work on and what do we need to change and how can we do it, ethically and with integrity. And it just gives us an opportunity to bring those conversations to the fore.
I agree. What about you, Linnea? You're at the front end of supporting birth moms. I mean, and you're a birth mom yourself. What are your thoughts on this month?
It's kind of like a bittersweet type thing, especially right now because things are really politically, really revved up. It's heated. For me, I think it's a great way to educate yourself on all parts of adoption because there's so many different parts of adoption. It's not just a private adoption or agency adoptions, but you've got other adoptions, whether it's through foster care or what, however that maybe comes to you as to what adoption means to you. But I love the education and I think it's crucial because we're evolving on a continual basis, but there are a lot of ways we're going backwards. And so I think acknowledging that and staying forward with what's happening and what's going on, I think is the great part about National Adoption Awareness Month is hopefully get enough education, enough people to come together respectfully and talk about what adoption is and what's happening and how can we make it better.
Yeah.
It's my thing.
I agree. I mean, it's obviously, we can't deny that it's evolved, I mean, especially since I've placed my son for adoption 23 years ago. It's open adoption. What is it? 98% of birth moms are choosing open adoption versus closed. I mean, so it's definitely evolved in that sense. But you're right. You've got foster care adoption. You've got international adoption. It's definitely a huge topic to discuss for sure. What are your thoughts, Brian, as an adoptive father?
Yeah, no, I think I also serve on the board of a pregnancy outreach center here locally. And so it seems like we're talking about this a lot, throughout the year. But I think this month is just a reminder, to continue to kind of internally reflect on our own journey that we had through our adoptive story and to continue to be an advocate for adoption, and understanding. I think it's just a good time to recenter and reset, on kind of what are we doing to actually get the word out there about so many of the positive stories that are happening around adoption. So.
Yeah, for sure. What why do you guys think it's important to have these open and respectful conversations when it comes to adoption and when it comes to this month?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just so many people kind of involved, with this. You got a bunch of representatives on this call now, and I think having that mutual respect and understanding, seeking first to understand before you try to be understood, and so I think being patient and gracious with one another, and really just having a judgment-free kind of, conversation, where people be open and transparent, be able to talk about your perspectives, be able to respect other people's perspective, as well. It is a very sensitive topic.
It really is.
If I can jump in real fast. Yeah, I'm sorry. If I could jump in real fast, I also think it's important because I think there's this conception that adoption is all sunshine and rainbows once you get adopted. And speaking as an adoptee myself, like I love my family, but there were definitely challenges, right? And I serve as the chairman of the advisory council at the Center for Adoption Support and Education as an emerging leader. And so I serve with 6 other adoptees who've had very different life stories, right? One of whom, one of my colleagues even put themselves into foster care so they could be adopted because they weren't in a safe situation, right? Those are stories that you don't always hear.
Yeah.
And so it's super important that we have open, honest dialogues, especially now to Linnea's point, like things are political. Like the only way we're going to cut through that is if we have open, honest dialogues with everybody in this constellation.
Yeah, I like that. What are your thoughts? Oh, go ahead.
No, I think you're right, Tony, about that whole thing is I think the key word is being respectful. I mean, it's very such emotionally driven. I mean, adoption is very emotionally driven, and there's a lot of emotions to loss, and there's a lot of emotions of excitement, and there's just a mix of feelings and emotions. So the hard part I'm seeing is to find a way to where we can all kind of come into a level we can all be respectful and have these conversations. And why do you feel this way? And what can we do to make this better? Instead of being forced something that doesn't fit the narrative or for everybody's narrative. I mean, how do we make this? I mean, you're never going to please everybody, but the reality of it is that sense of communication is really hard. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but that honest collaboration and having that collaboration and honesty and to do it in a respectful way, I'm seeing that is me more difficult than ever, which is weird, right? Because you can't do anything and resolve anything if you can't have those conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite personal, because we're talking about lives. You know what I mean? And so I was able to actually gather some. I took these questions to some of our birth mom mentors throughout the United States, and what they do is they're all over the U.S. through our organization, and they help women in unplanned pregnancies. And Mandy, a birth mom from Colorado, she answered the question, why is it important to have open, respectful conversations about adoption? She says, adoption is not one experience, it's many. For some, it's healing. For others, it carries grief. For many, it's a mix of both. Without open dialogue, these nuances get lost and people are left navigating assumptions instead of understanding. Respectful conversation builds empathy. It helps communities, schools, healthcare systems, and families respond with sensitivity instead of stigma. So I'm actually on board with you on that, Linnea, for sure. So how do you guys define adoption awareness versus adoption advocacy? What's the difference? Like, adoption awareness, I see adoption awareness is more of education, and advocacy is more like promoting ethics in adoption. Would you guys agree with that? Like promoting ethics in adoption, moral practices in adoption?
I would say advocacy is you want something to change, right?
Yeah.
You want, or something to be preserved, right? Like there are so many great adoption organizations, like the CCAI, if those are familiar, the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute, right? They bring like 12 young people to DC who are former foster youth and adoptees to advocate for things that they see in their communities, right? We're asking for something. We're saying, hey, Congress, hey, administration, could you do this or think differently about this? Whereas awareness is like these sorts of events. It's like, hey, there's adoption going on. Let's tell you about it. Let's educate you. And I think the difference is like when there's advocacy, who have a little bit less education, like it's less incumbent on the person to educate you because you already have some baseline of what we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. I would say you're more on the side, Tony, of advocacy, correct? Like not necessarily awareness, because you're in the 100%. Trenches,
Yes.
you know, working with foster youth. So I know you guys are going to like this question. What does ethical adoption look like today? What do you think, Jade?
This is a hard one for me. I feel like this one I'm kind of still working through. Like saying ethical or safer adoption can kind of feel like an oxymoron. I think it's more about each individual's experience and how adoption has impacted them. And so what might be helpful and safe and supportive for me may not look the same for someone else on this panel. And so going back to that like two coin thing, like, yes, some people say it's a blessing and you should be thankful, or it's traumatizing and it's awful. Like every experience is so different. And so I have a hard time answering this question.
Yeah. And obviously, like for me, I see ethics as like it's obviously changed because adoption has changed. And I also feel like you were saying, Jade, people have taken that word and have conformed it a little bit to their own experience, rightfully so. But I think it's definitely changed over the years too. Ethics has, adoption ethics. What are your thoughts on that, Linnea, when it comes to we've talked about that in the past. Adoption ethics and ethical adoption.
The word ethics is exhausting. It's ad nauseum. I saw everybody's faces when you said ethical, because I think that word is so overly used now. And if you look it up, it's basically on what your morals are. So that really doesn't take place in a courtroom. And so to really say ethical, I think people need to understand, because that terminology has just been used to the point, again, ad nauseum. How do we change that wording, and how do we make it? What does that really mean? And it's basically to abide by the laws that are in that state, and to respect those laws of in that state. And you're going through those motions on what the laws specifically are. But I do believe that ethics is just a it's a trigger word.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but I think people's perception of what ethical, again, that's part of this craziness that's going on right now, is what ethic really means. So,
yeah.
Well, and when I think of ethical adoption, I think of the humanity of it, and not letting the business of adoption supersede, right, the moral charge. And I think about, like, I mean, in my experience, I mean, I adopted, lots of children from foster care, 2 sibling groups from foster care. And, I come from the premise of we're looking for families for children, not we're looking for children for families. I think that's an ethical question, right? That we always, no matter how we're doing it and what the process is, we're looking at what is the experience of the adoptee, and are we keeping that at the fore, right? And we're considering the needs of everyone in the picture, but we can't let that piece slip away and be like, this family really wants it. It's not really about what the family wants. It's about who can meet the needs of that child and give them, the best upbringing that they can have, where they feel connected and anchored and have a sense of belonging, and they have connection with their first family. So they have all the pieces, of their story. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And I think education goes a long way in that, because a lot of people, it has never occurred to them. I mean, it depends a lot on the training folks get.
Yeah. I agree. That's so good. Yeah, I absolutely agree to that. Like, Shantell, what are your thoughts? What is, when you hear of adoption ethics, what comes to mind?
So coming from an adoptee side of things, I mean, like ethics, I think of, following the state laws. And I was born actually in Canada. So there were a lot of hoops they had to get me over the border into Canada as a Native American, from Canada, I mean. And but as a birth mom, I feel like the ethics drilled down a more important point because it was very, very important to me. Sorry, I'm going to tear up. That she was placed, that they're watching out for these kids. So like, I don't just want my child to go to anyone. I want it to go to someone who's financially stable, who is willing to go through all the hoops that I know adoption puts up for these parents, all the money they have to pay. Like that to me, in my perspective, I would say showed me that they wanted this baby more than anything. And so like just being grateful for that part of the ethics and what my parents had to go through to get me over the border to Canada as a Native American into the United States. So I can see that. And like I said, that's from my point of view. I know, there's other people's opinions that, sometimes it's probably not done ethically, and even acknowledging the side that things are done wrong, things slip through the cracks. But as a whole, like we're preserving life and we're creating a legacy for a child. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, your testimony is powerful. I mean, I think we can all agree here that when it all comes down to it, it's about the child and what's best for the child. And personally, for me as a birth mom, and where I was 23 years ago, what was best for my birth son was not me at the time, and that's a hard pill to swallow. So, but I think we can all agree that we want what's best for the child, for the adoptee.
Real fast,
Yeah.
Kelly. I just want to. You said something. You said something that really resonated with me. You said best at the time. I think we often forget that this is like adoption is a long process. It's a lifelong process. And just because you might not have been the best thing for your child at the time doesn't mean that you couldn't be later, right? I think
right, exactly.
that people change. That
yes.
and I would be remiss to say if I didn't believe that so many parents who make the decision to put their child up for adoption, aren't doing it because they don't want to be a parent. They're saying, I can't do this right now. And I don't think that should be reflective on the child that I have. And so I really want to bring that up because I really think we're starting to have that conversation that families of origin are not bad people. They're people who need help. And I think that is a huge shift that I've seen in the last 10 to 15 years of just doing this sort of work. So I just really wanted to underscore that point that you agree.
Yeah, I love that you being an adoptee saying that just, I mean, that's just awesome. And do you feel like, because you said that you're seeing the conversation when you guys are talking towards that, when it comes to the birth parent, do you see that conversation going on in the adoptee community more so?
I do. I mean, especially now,
okay.
especially now that we're getting into this notion of like kinship, right? Like there are family connections you can keep. And I think, I will say that a lot of good things have happened under the last two administrations as far as like appointing, people who work on child welfare. They've really expanded the conversation, to say like, hey, maybe what you need is a resource parent. Like, let's connect you, birth parent, to someone else who's doing the same process, so you have an accountability, right? Like this notion that people can still be people is so fundamentally important because I think we ask them to be perfect when we ourselves cannot be.
Right. That's so true. That's so true. Did you have something to say, Bryant? Or was that, that was you, Deb. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that it also speaks to the value of maintaining those connections and those relationships, because regardless of someone's circumstances, particularly when we're talking about kids coming into foster care, they're coming into foster care because their parents don't love them. They're coming into foster care because their parents can't safely meet their needs on a daily basis at that time, right? But all of us, I mean, I would like to think that I've grown and changed in the last 5, 10, 20 years. Right. And I see that with my kids' birth families, that even when they were in really dire straits, they've grown and matured and healed in ways and have a lot of value to offer to the children. And there's, I think about like the birth dad even of my first 3 kids. and incredibly violent, head of a gang, all this kind of stuff,
Mhm.
all the things that scare people about birth parents. And if he was sitting right here, he would say, no, I was not a good father. But he's an excellent grandpa, right? He is an excellent grandpa. And there is so much intergenerational healing by having him involved with my adult kids and their children. And it takes absolutely nothing away from my relationship with my grandchildren. So I think that it just speaks to the value of maintaining those connections.
Yeah, definitely maintaining them when they're safe. Do you have an open adoption through do you have any open adoption relationships, Deb, with your children?
Yeah, and they all came to us at various ages. But with that family, we
That's
didn't have any
wonderful.
contact with them for 10 years.
Wow.
And then, an aunt who had been a teenager went to the library every Saturday for 2 years because she didn't have her own computer, and went on social media looking for my oldest daughter and saying, do you have a sibling named this and named this? Because I can't find them. And then we connected with them. And, it's been a really good and healing thing. And with my other 4 girls, we've had an ongoing relationship. We already knew their parents because they're all deaf and my husband's deaf and they all went to school together. So
that's wonderful. Does
Hey,
anybody
Callie.
else?
Oh yeah, sorry, Callie. I was going to add one more thing.
Yeah.
I think when you think about an ethical, adoption, it kind of comes to my mind, that the birth mother, the birth father, if they want to parent, they have the ability to do that, right? They're not choosing adoption based off of, I have a bad home environment or I can't afford to, feed my family. So, if they want to parent, maybe removing some of those barriers and obstacles, getting hooking them up with resources and agencies that can help with those things. I think that's sometimes on the board I'm on that the organization is the Pregnancy Outreach Center. We see it a lot where you're, basically sometimes people are making decisions based off the environment they're in, right? So we try to remove those barriers from them and say, hey, we can get you set up in this housing, or we can, set up over here with some educational, kind of support here to get, if you want to continue your education. And so just things like that. I think so many times, it's decisions are made based on kind of resources at the time. And then the other note I had here was just that adoption, it's a lifelong, covenant. It's not an event. Sometimes people think about adoption as just an event, not just the baby being born in the hospital that day and the adoption takes place or finalized in the courthouse 6 months later or whatever. That's the event of it, but it's actually a lifelong covenant between all the parties, that are represented in it. And then also just a commitment to truth, even when it's hard, I think just a commitment to that truth, even when it's hard, I think that's what makes, relationships between open adoption kind of work the best, is when you can just be open and honest with your children, with the birth parents, with adoptive, parents, and be able to have a dialogue that's open, honest, and truthful at all times.
And you have open adoptions with your oh, that's wonderful.
Yes.
How often do you guys see the birth parents?
Yeah, so it's there. So our oldest son, Drew, we have a very good relationship with the birth parents there, and we see them very rarely, especially Drew's birth father. He comes in, as Tony said, over time, he's become, he's grown up and become very involved and has other kids now. He's about to get married. And so it's been a very good story there. I felt like my role throughout the years has really been to kind of foster that relationship between my son, Drew, and Matt, and to be able to just be a conduit for them, and so to create opportunities for us to all be together and to do things together. And so they have a great relationship. Maybe they play Xbox all the time and online, and we're all big sports fans. So Matt will come in town, we'll go to football games, that kind of stuff. And so it's a really good thing there. Our other 2 adopted children, we don't have as great a relationship with the birth father, but the birth mother is involved. And as Tony said, she was at a point in time when we adopted them when they were a little older, and at the point in time she was in a spot where it just wasn't really it wasn't a good thing for her to be able to parent at that time. But since then, she's kind of changed her life, and she's gotten remarried, has 3 other children now, and has done a really good job. And so we just try to foster that relationship as as best as possible as well. But that one's a little bit newer and and a little bit more time. I think that one would get a little bit more. I guess I'm not, lack of better words, just a little bit more cadence on visits and doing things with them. I think there's still a little bit of hurt involved in that one and those type of things. And so anyway, just everybody's healing, I think, from that. The kids and the birth mom.
I think it's you have made it a point to be there and to be just available for the birth parents when they're ready. And I love that, I like that you're there. And, I would say this as a birth parent myself, time heals. And like I was saying earlier, we grow and we move forward and we mold. And I'm not the person I was 23 years ago when I placed my birth son for adoption. So, yeah. And you had mentioned, Brian, pregnancy resource centers. And I don't want to go too far from that, but what are your thoughts when it comes to pregnancy resource centers and how they approach the topic of adoption to women facing unexpected pregnancies? That's where my heart is at, because our organization, we work with abortion determined women. We don't do anything adoption. We help them make parenting plans. But when I go into pregnancy resource centers, they're so scared to even bring up the topic. What is your advice on that? I mean, I'm sure you see it. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm the most qualified to give advice or anything on that, but I would say it's a very unique organization we work with. Is that it's actually a licensed adoptions agency as well, and but it's all centered around the birth mother and resources for her. So if the adoption is the route you want to go, they will foster that, but they don't start from a position of adoption. They start from a position of, hey, what is best for the child? What's best for you in this? What do you want to do? They kind of work through all the resources with them. And if they do choose the place for adoption and go that route, I think someone said on the call earlier, we tell the families that are adopting that we're not trying to find you a child. Actually, we're looking for a family for a child, right? And so they have to know that there's plenty of times that if the birth mother changes their mind at the hospital, we just tell them you need to be prepared for that, because we support that birth mother, and if we want that child to be with that birth mother if that's what she wants, and that she's capable of doing that. And so we educate the families that are adopting on that things can change last minute, and you need to be okay with that. And so anyway, and that's it. So I think a lot of it is just how we look at things a little bit differently, since we do have both. And they're kind of operated, in different kind of divisions of the organization, I guess you'd say. But I think it's a resource. We look at adoption as a resource for the birth mother, not as a resource for families trying to adopt a child.
And I see, I always encourage pregnancy resource centers to speak to birth parents and to get accurate information. There's so much information out there, and make sure that they do know their local adoption agency and look into how their practices, you know what I mean? Like in their area. So that's really important. Let me skip that since how has adoption helped shape you as a person? Linnea, how has adoption helped shape you as a person? That's why I called on you.
So many ways.
Yeah.
It's given me a lot of opportunity to really give myself a lot of grace, because there's so much, shame that comes with birth mothers and placing, and that's kind of how society unfortunately still is. I think it's kind of going backwards lately, and I don't think that people really realize that you have to have grace with the younger part of you and the choice that you made, and to relay that, especially during reunification. If you have an open adoption, it's a constant thing, and so there needs to be this respect, and again, this openness and respect for each other to be able to have this open dialogue. And I kind of want to say what Brian had to say. I love the thought that you have that respect and that openness to try to work things out, because I think the part that I really get annoyed with my reunification, and I think it's a huge lack of education with my adoption in general, was a child is not an ownership. This child was a gift, and you chose to raise this child in the best way you can to become an independent human being, and hopefully a good human being in when they get old enough. And I'm seeing a lot of this ownership, even amongst birth mothers and open adoption. So for me, it's really finding grace and hoping other birth mothers can find grace with their younger self, but to find out what your boundaries are, and what are boundaries, and what does that mean, and loving yourself, and having a plan to move forward. After I placed my daughter for adoption, that was my goal. Like, I'm going to be the best person I can be. I'm going to make this happen. And this is, this is my goal. If I didn't have those goals and I didn't move forward with them, I would be stagnant, and there would be no growth for me, or there wouldn't be grace that I had to give myself. And I think you have to have grace with the adoptive parents and adoptees too, because that there's an expectation. I think we all want to live in this bubble and think it's all pretty, but it's not always going to be pretty, and you have to be okay with that, because life happens.
Yeah. And I love, like, when you said goals, it's so important that birth moms have that, especially in line. If they know that, yes, I'm going through with the adoption, I am placing, it's so important that they have goals that they're going to, check off really after they place, because you can't just sit there in your feelings after you place, because that's a very scary thing to do, so you have to have those goals after you place your child for adoption.
I think it's toxic.
So
is really what it's so toxic to yourself. It's toxic to hopefully open adoption that's there, and you're not going anywhere with it. And that's hard for the adoptive couple, because they're trying to manage and do its best, and they're learning too. I think the other expectation, I think people think that adoptive parents have all the answers, and and they're human beings too.
Yeah, I was going to say they're human beings as well. They're not perfect.
Too. And they've you've got to give them grace, and you've got to understand, life happens to them. There's no security, I should say, in everybody being a specific way and staying the same person at that moment in time when they choose, to be a part of each other's lives in adoption. And so again, it's having that grace with everybody and understanding, and I hopefully that made a lot of sense. I don't know. I mean, you guys.
No, it does. It does. Give yourself grace too, for goodness sakes.
Absolutely.
Don't beat yourself up. As a birth mom, I remember, like, I think back, and I just was so hard on myself after I placed my son for adoption. And give yourself a little bit of grace. You're human too. So, for adoptive parents, that would be for you and you, Brian, and Deb. What has been the greatest joy of growing your family through adoption? Deb, you go first.
It's hard to pin it down. What an extraordinary journey this has been. There's so much to it, and I have a really big family. We adopted a sibling group of 3, and then had a baby, and then adopted a sibling group of 4. And our kids came to us at all different ages. The youngest one came at 3. The oldest one came at 16. I have grown so much as a person. I have stretched and learned, and had to do things that were way outside my comfort zone, because that's what my kids needed. And just seeing them grow. I have the long view now. I am parenting 3 of my 10 grandchildren following my daughter's stroke. But having my kids be in their late 20s and early 30s, and they're people that I love to know. I'm like so honored to be in their lives, let alone be their parent. And our goal was really for them to be able to pull the best of the strengths from their first family and the best from our adoptive family, and really just weave that into a tapestry that is a masterful them, you know, and that's happened. And all of them feel really connected to family, and all of them love nothing more than us being together. And that's a powerful, powerful thing, because there's a lot in our parenting where we're like, you know, people say don't sweat the small stuff. There's so much that doesn't matter. Anybody who's parenting, just FYI, there's a whole lot that just doesn't matter. But the big stuff does matter, and how they feel about themselves and how they feel about family. And the way I see my kids now parenting in the most beautiful, extraordinary way is where the joy comes in. And it's been hard. It was hard. There were lots of times that were really, really tough. And I think people need to recognize, like you said, that finalization of an adoption is not the end of the story. Like, that's the beginning of a whole new chapter with its own joys and its own challenges.
Because you're not just parenting, you're adding adoption to it as well. So you're you're dealing with the obstacles of being a parent, being a mom, right? But then you're adding adoption on top of that.
And you have to recognize these unique complexities of adoption. And it's not better or worse, but you can't say, well, oh, it's just going to be this. It's not. We have to acknowledge those things, and we have to recognize attachment stuff, and we have to recognize the trauma. And that doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that we have to pay attention, and we need to be attuned, and we need to help educate and advocate. But I can talk about my kids forever because they're so amazing.
And your grandkids, you sounds like you've got a busy schedule.
I do. We got babies coming. We had 3 babies this year, so we're just family's growing like gangbusters.
How? Let's see here, Brian. How has your child changed your life for the better? Or your children?
Well, no, absolutely. I think it's the realization that a family is built on more than just biology, right? And, the love and the support that we receive from just our families who went through this, set up kind of goals, and everybody knowing their role kind of in this. And, but I think just the heart of it all is just that, I think it just made me have a better understanding of, family, and family doesn't always look a certain way, and broadening our family and considering kind of the birth parents of our children, our family as well, and so not just, they're not just, birth parents, they're are our family now too. It's going to be with us forever, and so make sure our kids know that. And, I think just being a good example for that, to our for our biological kids as well. Melanie and I, when my wife Melanie and I, when we adopted, we talked to our biological kids as well, so that you got to be on board with this as well. This is a family decision here. And so I think it just strengthened our family in the sense that, like, hey, we can do this. We want to do this. But I think, as Deb said, we know it's not an easy thing to do, right? It's a hard thing, right? And it's a lot involved with it. And I think sometimes, I think sometimes you don't see all that's involved with it at the very beginning, and then as you walk through it, you see it more. But I think it's allowed our family to be more understanding, more close knit, more understanding, and just understanding in general of different situations. As Deb was talking about, like, perspective on things is, sometimes, things are going on and you look at what your family's gone through, some of the things you've done in your family through our adoption stories. It's just been a very beautiful thing to see, and how I think Tony mentioned it earlier that, who people are 15 years ago aren't who they are today, and and just really seeing all the characters in our story evolve, and myself included. And so, anyway, that's what I would say. Sorry, the long-winded way of saying that, but I think what I'd sum it up as is it's been a beautiful journey that's been hard and challenging at times, but it's allowed us, our family, to dig deep and you have a better, better understanding for others, and to have more grace toward others as well, and give ourselves more grace too. And so,
yeah. So this question's for us birth moms. What brings you peace when you reflect on your decision? Shantell, what brings you peace when you reflect on your decision of adoption? And how long ago did you place?
18 years.
18 years.
So
okay.
yeah, I have two
So go
older
back
boys.
18 years.
Yeah, I have two older boys,
Okay.
23 and 21, and then I had her a few years later, and then I have two younger ones. So at that time, like Tony had mentioned, it was the best decision, and it's one that I would wholeheartedly do again if I found myself in that situation. I'm sorry, what was the question?
No, you answered it. No, I mean,
did I? Okay.
Yeah, Linnea, what are your thoughts on, what, as you reflect back, like what brings you peace to that decision? I mean, you're that was 18 years ago. Shantell, do you have a relationship with your kiddo now?
So not necessarily. My older kids
Okay.
do via social media. I kind of did. My birth mom is an amazing woman. She passed away in 2020. And I have a sister that's watching today, and I love all my sisters from Canada. But I don't have a relationship with her because I was such a mess after I gave her up for adoption. There was like some really, really dark years. And so I kind of backed off, which is what my birth mom did. Because I understand as a birth mom, I didn't want to push myself upon her mother because I wanted to honor her as her mother so much. And so I kind of did to her what my birth mom did to me, and it was restored at the end. So I'm just believing for restoration, but really just honoring her mother as her mother, and then also able to honor my birth mom for choosing life and having the ability to have a relationship with her at the end was like, it was amazing.
Yeah, and that requires so much patience from you, Shantell, and so much maturity, And Linnea, your situation, like when you look back, what brings you peace at your decision of adoption? I think your birth daughter is a little bit older.
Yeah, 35
Yeah.
years. Yeah. And we reunited when she was, I think, around 12 or 13 years old. And it was a bumpy ride. I mean, that was probably the hardest part of my life. And with her adoptive couple and with her, there was a lot of non-conversations. Not that I didn't want them. I wanted them dramatically. And it was finding peace for myself and finding and respecting them and giving them the grace that they're just human too. But I had to step back and like you said, Shantell, it's been hard. It's been heartbreaking because it feels like another loss. Like you've already mourned a loss and you're mourning the loss again. But I still look at it and go, I wouldn't be the person that I am today had I, made any other choice. And I wouldn't have my son and my husband that's in my life. And I love all of that. I mean, the learning experience, and then finally unknowingly getting into adoption the way I did. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all that. So
yeah,
having grace with myself, I think it was really the best decision under the circumstances at that point in time in my life. And I will always love them and respect them.
I know we're approaching the time. Adoptees, Shantell and Jade and Tony, what's one myth you'd like to debunk? It can be anything about adoption.
Oh God, we have only one myth. Let this be a good one. I think the myth that I would want to debunk is that adoption is, everything is perfect after an adoption, right? I think we don't talk about dissolutions and dissolved adoptions enough to say like it takes a lot of work to keep a family together. And I really want to uplift organizations that do that work because I think those are lifesavers. I would much rather someone, and I hate to say this, but I'd much rather have someone stay in care if they were going to be adopted and go back to care, right? I think we're going to re-traumatize every time we do that. And so I want people to know it's hard. It is a hard work.
Yeah.
And I can say, as one of 24 children in my family, 22 of us who are adopted, my parents are crazy. You know, it took a lot.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it took a lot of work to keep that family together, right? It was mental health services, it was physical health services, right? So much has to go into it, and it has to be something that everybody, to Brian's point, everybody in the family has to work at,
Yeah.
right? It's not just between the adoptee and the parent, it's every single other person who's in that house. We all have to be agreeing that we're going to be one family, and we're going to keep working at this, even on the days we want to hit each other. And believe me, being the older brother, I got hit a lot by my So,
and I'm sure you got a lot of responsibility placed on you too, being the older brother.
I did. I like to tell my siblings, I'm more of a dad to you than our dad. You know, like, at some point they just got it checked out. My parents are like, you know what, you got this.
When you said, I want to go back to real quick when you said you rather a child be placed or be kept in foster care and then placed. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, we do much more damage when we adopt a child only for them to go back into the system. I think that is re-traumatizing, because when you adopt someone, you're saying, hey, I'm going to be your forever family. And then what you do by saying, actually, I'm not, is you're giving them much more trust issues, and you're going to continue to re-traumatize. So I'd much rather them wait to find that forever family than find a forever family and it not be forever.
Okay.
And that's probably controversial to my adoptee and my foster care community, but like, you know, we're doing hot takes here at 11 o'clock.
Yeah, no, this is great because I'm more so, I'm a birth mom and I talk about adoption, but I'm more so on also the side of the pro-life. So I'm working with abortion determined women, and when I'm working with abortion determined women, we're trying to get them to see life in their womb. We're not necessarily jumping to like, hey, place your child for adoption, you know, and all the women that have gone through our organization, they have parented. And so we're on the side of helping these women make parenting plans and connecting them to resources and childcare and whatever they're going through. So that's good that's enlightening to people that aren't really speaking adoption every day, you know. So that's the first time I've heard of that. So awesome. Okay. What about you, Jade?
Oh, so many good things. I think it's important that we continue to normalize and destigmatize the conversation surrounding adoption, the families who are impacted by adoption, adoptees and their experiences, as I think everyone's kind of touched on. We're focused so much on the beginning process or the end process. We really need to focus on the lifelong journey, that experience, the growing, the understanding, the healing. There's so much that's involved in that. I think it's been great to see communities more openly talk about adoption, their experiences, and what it's like to be part of this experience. And I think I run into a lot of times that other people who are either not impacted by it or have no familiarity or knowledge of it, they're either unclear or they try to use cliche ways to talk about it. And I think it's been helpful to see our community start to give other people language of how to address certain areas about adoption, or just how to be more kind and respectful when you're approaching something that could be super sensitive or super traumatizing for somebody. So I think it's been great to kind of see that education, that evolving piece happen.
Yeah, for sure. We've got some questions, and I was just going through them. What would y'all say to someone brand new to the adoption world who wants to adopt? Shantell, what are your thoughts? What would you want to say to somebody who's getting into wanting to adopt?
Well, I think it's beautiful. I love and honor a family like Brian. I'm just blown away by you, who would take a child and love them like their own. I'm the crier, okay? I'm the crier. But I also think understanding that, you know, I was adopted as a baby. I came down here very, very young. I think I made it into the United States when I was a month old, I carried wounds of rejection and abandonment, even from a child, that played out through my entire life. So, you know, debunking the myth that it's going to be perfect, because why is my, little girl acting this way, acting out this way? It's because she has a wound. And that's something I do now, is I do prayer and ministry with, I've encountered adults, adoptees, and they've just never went there to the pain and the grief that happens when a child transitions into another family. Not saying it's not wrong, but understanding that there is a wound there. And that was a huge source of healing for me, was when I was able to admit that it really did hurt, that, my mom didn't want me. I didn't have my sisters, and grieving. And I didn't grieve until 5 years ago. And then, once I went through the process of grieving and Jesus walked me patiently through it, it's just been beautiful. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
What about one of you guys, Deb or Brian, since y'all are adoptive parents, what would you say to someone brand new to the adoption world who wants to adopt?
Yeah, I would say, make sure your whole family's on board. Make sure you know your role in the process, and then I would say, just it's a beautiful thing, and just be patient and understanding throughout the process. But yeah, I think more and more people, when they understand adoption, I think they just need to make sure everybody's on the same page. I think that's the deal. You don't want anybody in your family to have any unresolved resentment because they weren't on the same page as the rest of the family. And I think just being open and honest and letting people talk, through those things before you make the decision to do that. And I would say too, getting to know the birth parents of our children, it's been a great joy. So I think I would tell people, like, there's hard things about this, but when you go through it, it's very beautiful as well.
And I would even say, talk to adoptees and talk to birth parents too.
Yeah.
And spend time with other adoptive families, get connected to adoptive support groups, see what's the real deal, because it's bittersweet, and there's awesome stuff and there's really hard stuff. But I think that people come in often with the concept that love is enough. And love isn't enough. You have to have an awareness. You got to have some really solid training to address the wounds that Shantell is talking about, and to help kids heal and thrive, right? And to be their best selves. And you can't just love them more if you're not looking at what's driving the behavior and how can I help meet that need in a different way, right? So that they don't need that behavior, as opposed to just trying to tackle the behavior in a really traditional way.
I think, and also to add on what Deb was saying, I think also to know that it's the greatest honor and privilege, for someone to place their children with you. The responsibility behind that, to know that, like, someone has placed their child with you, and it becomes your child, but it was a gift to you, right? And all children are gifts, even your biological kids are gifts as well. But I would say that I felt when we were adopting, and when someone was placing their birth child with us, I felt a great responsibility to be a good steward of that child, and represent them as well as our family well. I wanted to do a good job for them. So I felt that, it was a different feeling around that. I think we parent all of our kids the same way. We don't parent any differently, but I felt that responsibility in the sense that, like, this is a gift that we've been given. And I'm a Christian, so I would say, even your biological kids are a gift that God's given you to shepherd as well. But I think but I do think you want to make the birth parents proud. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
I love that. And another question: what are birth moms looking for in regards to support throughout the years? That's a good one, Linnea. You've worked with a lot of birth moms post placement throughout the years. What do you see? What are they looking for?
I think most of it's just being seen and heard, and finding the right group of birth mothers has been really a challenge. Again, there's a lot of political crap that's kind of going in, and birth mom support groups online sometimes are sometimes more toxic than they are supportive. I really am a big advocate on face to face. Ask these questions. Let's have conversations. I think the energy of being face to face with another birth mother is so empowering, and it's so fulfilling to know that you're an actual person versus, this is about as close as you can get if you're across the country. But
you're not hiding behind a screen, and I don't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
You're not hiding behind a screen, and when it's one-on-one, it's more personable.
Very.
There's just so much information out there today. We weren't, as human beings, made to have all that information all at once all the time. And so that one-on-one, I agree, is so important.
And it's probably the hardest thing to do for some reason. And I kind of hate that, because I think the reality of it is if you want to heal, and that's your choice, if you want to heal, then you've got to do the work to get there. And it's in all parties of adoption, right? We all have to learn, and we all have to find a way to heal, for whatever brought you into adoption. But specifically for birth mothers, it is a huge trauma, and it's really hard can deal with that, because there's a lot of up and downs throughout the years. And then reunification is another issue. And how do we talk to them about dealing with those emotions? Some, like nowadays, it's just kind of a thing everybody does. But we always hear about the adoptees, but not all the time do we hear the mental health of what it did to a birth mother. Sometimes it's not closure for her. It just opens up another door. I call it Pandora's box. You never know what you're going to get. And hopefully it's all for the good. But once you open that door, you need to take the responsibilities and make it work somehow. Even if that means it's only you that needs to find grace and find forgiveness, however that may be. But find somebody that is face to face. Find somebody that's willing to have these awkward conversations, because I know that society is to get online and be in these groups, but I think that it can be more toxic than it is helpful. So,
well, and I also want to, because you mentioned something, and it, when women are placing their child for adoption, they're bringing in the trauma that was before,
right?
And we also need to realize that too. That's why that's one of the reasons why they're placing. They're in a really bad circumstance, or they're facing things, mentally. And so, I would even add to that. It's very important that after a birth mom places, that she gets the help she needs, because, So,
and it's
because adoption can add to that. It can add to that trauma that they're bringing into that decision.
Yeah. And it's hard to find. I found that just recently, and more so, I've known for a while, but just recently, we're finding less and less support for these women, and especially with with not just post placement, but the long terms of what do we do and how do we manage that, and what those emotions are going to be like, and that's hard because you're reliving it. And so again, it's having grace with yourself, and it's having enough love for yourself in order to move forward, because you can't love others and allow others to love you if you don't know how to love yourself. And that's a lot of forgiveness, because again,
I just want to say that I think that all of what we've said also relates to birth dads, because they haven't really been in the conversation, but to not minimize the experience that they have as well.
Yeah, I agree. And we have like one more minute. And so I'm going to, one more question. How do you guys feel about geographic distance from birth families and placements? I think that's a really good one. And Shantell, you could probably touch on that a little bit. What are your thoughts on that? Can you hear me? Oh, I think you're muted.
So sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good.
No, you were just asking about the geographic. So my daughter is in Florida. I'm from Canada. I felt like at the time distance was probably the easiest, as it was a healthy distance. And I mean, I know it's not like that for everybody. I know there's different scenarios, but I wanted to go see her like every day. And I also wanted to go see my mom every day and my sisters every day. So, I mean, that's just kind of my point of view. The distance did create a yearning, but it made it better in the end, because when I finally really connected with my sisters and my birth mom, like, it was beautiful.
And you as an adoptee, and what about like after you placed, like, did you place in the same state?
No, I placed in Utah. I had to leave the
Okay.
state to get away from some situations. And
Okay.
like I said, at the time, I wasn't who I am today. And if I was in the same scenario, same situation, I would have done it
Yeah.
the same way.
I think Callie, the distance,
Mhm.
makes it convenient, but I think more so the distance, it's the effort, right? So like,
Mhm.
just like you have family members that may move, your kids may move after they get married, that kind of stuff. It's the effort to try to make those intentional visits, intentional
Mhm.
contact. Technology nowadays allows you to do a lot of things. So
Mhm.
just when you do those things, even if the distance is further, the distance being closer does make it more convenient, for all parties. But I do think that you can still make it work, even if you're across the country. And you just make effort, several times a year to meet in person and talk on, video conferences and that kind of stuff. So anyway, I
Yeah.
just wanted to add that. And then I wanted to add one thing too. I just want to tell all the birth mothers how much I appreciate you all that are on the call, and the birth fathers as well. I have such a great respect for you. And I think that's one myth that we didn't talk about today. So many people think in our culture that for the birth mothers or birth fathers, it's an easy decision to place for adoption. It is not. It is the hardest thing
Mhm.
these women have ever done, these men have ever done. I've talked to Matt, the birth father, my son Drew, and he said it was the hardest thing he ever did. He didn't even talk about it for like 10 years, but then he just told me it was the hardest thing he'd ever done in his life to have to do that.
Yeah.
So such a great respect for you all.
Thank you. And
Same.
yeah, and I feel the same way about adoptive parents. So ditto. I feel the same way. Is there anything else you guys want to say? That about ends our panel. Anything you guys want to mention before the month is over?
I just want to say
And we
real
can't
fast.
talk about adoption anymore.
Yeah, just real fast. Adoption is a lifelong journey for everybody
Mhm.
involved, and I think that needs to be something that we carry forward.
Mhm.
There are going to be days you don't understand why your child feels this way. There are days I feel a certain way and I don't understand it. Right? I'm 31 years old and I'm still learning, and I think we need to remember that. The day you adopt, until the day you die, you're on a journey. Don't forget that, because that journey is going to have ups and downs, but you got to keep moving forward.
Yep. I love that. Well, thank you guys for being on the call with me. I appreciated getting to know y'all, and I hope we can continue to have these open adoption perspectives. It's so important that we all come together and we talk about this. So, and anybody watching, thank you guys for watching.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thanks for
thanks.
All right. All right, guys. I think that's about it. 103, we did it. It's so funny because I think we got through maybe 10 questions